All right. Thank everyone for joining us in our last session today. This will be the second Israel-Palestine panel. My name is Brittany Khatib. I work for Dr. Aman at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where I'm earning my master's in library science. We have a great panel with us today. Dr. Zelkovitz is the author of the Fatah movement, Islam nationalism, and armed struggle politics. He is an expert on Palestinian society and politics and Middle East history. He is lecturer and research fellow at the University of Haifa. We also have Dr. Ferrero, who specializes in Iran and U.S.-Iran relations, the role of Islam in foreign policy, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Currently, he is visiting faculty at the Whitehead School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University in New Jersey. Then we also have Dr. Olmert. He is a former peace negotiator, political insider, author, and public speaker. His latest book, Syria, The End of Stability Without Legitimacy, is to be published yet this year. He is adjunct professor at the University of South Carolina. If anyone is interested in talking about anything that we have today, or publishing papers, or interested in the Digest of Middle East Studies, please speak with myself or Dr. Aman after the talk. And I would like to start and welcome Dr. Zelkovitz.
Thank you very much. And so when we start, the outbreak of the Arab Spring.
I can't hear you. Get a little closer to the microphone, please.
Now it's better? Now? Okay. The outbreak of the Arab Spring was met by a weakened fundamental Palestinian society, which was in the process of searching to get out of the political deadlock it had encountered. In the wake of the complex reality that emerged, both the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas government in Gaza screamed for ways to secure their political dominance. Now, the question is, has the Arab Spring, which is changing the face of regimes, thank you very much, across the Arab world, passed over the Palestinian society? For many years, actually since the Nakba of 1948, up until the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinians enjoyed, I would say, a relative, advantage compared to their Arab counterparts. Their leadership was not granted the opportunity to downright and suppress their own people. That was, of course, until the founding of the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians had not established a sovereign rule with territorial continuum, which would probably have developed into a monarchic or republican pattern based on mechanism of operation. Paradoxically, the national operation of the Palestinians in the Arab world, and of course under the Israeli occupation, development aroused civil society. It was precisely the establishment of the Palestinian Authority which suppresses the vibrant civil society, as it subjected the people of the West Bank and Gaza to a structured regime based on the model of the surrounding oppressive Arab states. The civil society organization and the student movement, which had challenged the Israeli military regime since 1967, let's say since the 70s actually, now either absorbed or persecuted by the Palestinian mechanism. In addition, the financial channels which supplied funds to the civil society came under the supervision and monitoring of the PA. 2 years after the breaking out of the Arab Spring, the political apparatus in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are still profound and the civil society is dormant. That was the situation actually in 2010 and 2011. In 2012, things start to change. In 2012, actually, we see demonstration against the socio-economical problems which took place around the West Bank. The demonstration spread out to the Gaza Strip, where a man set himself on fire as a protest against Hamas' ill welfare policy and the standard of living. Mahmoud Abbas was confronted with the support of various Fatah members and internal groups for the protest and demonstration, and first and foremost against Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, who is not fellow of the Fatah movement. Alongside, Abbas, as well as other Fatah members, knew that these demonstrations, without a firm economic-based structure, may go out of hand and turn against him. Hamas, on the other hand, had managed, by virtue of its monopoly over the power, to tighten its grip on the Gaza Strip. The field barrier in Gaza did not give away, and the violence events of summer 2007 are still fresh in the minds, and I would say also of the bodies of the population over there. Yet, one must ask oneself whether such measures could actually affect the current situation, considering the changes in the Arab world, and the notion that the young generation across the region draws encouragement and strength from the increased freedom of expression and their ability to generate change. Comparing to the Arab world and to the Palestinian Authority, one must bear in mind that the geopolitical conditions are extremely different. Palestinians do not have their own Tahrir Square in which millions can gather. A reality of the division is the same not only regarding affairs between Gaza and the West Bank, but also within the West Bank itself. The Palestinian experience actually teaches us that the old guard is willing to enter into the deliberation and even to negotiate a change in the political power distribution so as to preserve the position of strength. While in the Arab world, the masses flocked the streets and demanded the removal of terrorist regimes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shukran. So while in the Arab world, the masses flocked the streets and demanded the removal of terrorist regimes, the Palestinian city squares, by and large, remained vacant. The only voices heard in the Palestinian public sphere were the calls to end the inter-Palestinian divide. The young protesters staged a mass of protests on November 15, 2011, backed by the widespread internet campaign on social networks such as Facebook and YouTube. In Ramallah, a protest tent was established, but in Gaza, all forms of protest were suppressed. Now, in response, the leadership of Fatah and Hamas were apparently attentive to the young voices, which called for the end of the divide. The geopolitical changes in the Arab world and the inability of one side to overshadow the other paved the way for inner discussions. The willingness of both parties to enter into deliberations regarding an Israel-Palestinian reconciliation I think is one of the most striking outcomes of the Arab Spring, from my point of view, yes. The futile tactical maneuvers initiated by Mahmoud Abbas in his plea to the UN managed to guarantee only limited achievement. These efforts may have maybe reinforced his image as a stubborn leader true to his path and preserved a certain level of Palestinian hope, but they did not change the political situation on the ground. The flexibility towards Hamas displayed by Abbas is an indication of the despair which took hold of the Palestinian Authority decision makers on account of their Israeli counterparts. For instance, Abbas' address in September 2011 in the UN, which outlined the historical Palestinian narrative, was meant for Palestinian and international ears only. The speech itself was firm and utterly ignored the Israeli partner, which Abbas is ultimately supposed to sit with in the negotiating table in the end of the day. The discipline which prevailed among the Palestinian decision makers in the West Bank was contrasted by the celebration of the Palestinian Authority officials, which managed to secure the Palestinian bid to join UNESCO. This achievement, this is the biggest achievement of Abbas until now. This achievement was an indication of Abbas' strategy continuing diplomatic efforts, and guaranteeing an official recognition of Palestine as the 194th member of the UN. Well, the fact that Abbas continued with his plea to the UN despite US objections has infuriated the State Department. The American threat to withdraw the founding of UNESCO only increased the popularity of Abbas in the Palestinian streets, which not only perceived the US as Israel's major ally, but also as a symbol, and the symbolic issue is very important over here, also as a symbol of the global imperialism. On the other side of the divide, in the Gaza Strip, Hamas failed in 2010 and 11 to leverage, especially after 2011, to leverage the prisoners swap with Israel, the Gilad Shalit deal, with Israel to present an alternative which would truly challenge Abbas. The Palestinian Authority managed to contain the spontaneous outbursts of joy in the wake of the prisoner exchange between Hamas and Israel. Suddenly we can see in the West Bank the Hamas flags waving again in the public sphere, but the PA chose, instead of confrontation with the Hamas establishment in the West Bank, to content it. Yet the Arab Spring did not initially bode well with the Islamic Party in 2010, but things have changed since then. The uprising in Syria severely limited the maneuvering option of the Damascus-based Hamas political. Naturally, Hamas had to support the Syrian masses. In the beginning, of course, they didn't do so, because they were under Bashar al-Assad, yes, they were under the Bashar al-Assad auspice. In response to the terror in Syria, Hamas sought to get closer to Egypt. The ending of the interior Hamas-Fatah reconciliation agreement was the first sign that Hamas was willing to make some compromises on its way back to the center of the public arena. By the way, Egypt is not just the replacement of Syria, it's Egypt and Qatar. I will speak later on about the Qatar's involvement. The same agreement, and now we're talking about the Cairo Accord between Fatah and Hamas, that signed in the end of 2010. The same agreement was refused by Hamas in October 2009, but the geopolitical changes demanded that Hamas make a sacrifice. As soon as it signed the reconciliation deal with Fatah, a path for dialogue with the Egyptian intelligence was created. However, one must remember that there are also power struggles within the Hamas. Once the group forcefully took over the Gaza Strip in June 2007, becoming the sovereign power there, it began to be a direct responsibility for the lives of Gazans. Hamas in Gaza took heavy blows since the takeover of Gilad Shalit, and later on in custody operation. Behind the heavy price that the movement paid, it was also required to rehabilitate the Gaza Strip, a poverty-stricken territory that is one of the most crowded places on earth. Gazans raised their eyes to the West Bank, where Abbas form of succeeded in establishing a state infrastructure, and concluded that Hamas had failed them. Hamas' inability to present a diplomatic achievement led the Hamas Gaza leadership to apply extra pressure on the Hamas Damascus leadership to push the Gilad Shalit deal forward. The Arab Spring had elevated the position of Hamas leadership in Gaza at the expense of the political war in Damascus. Nevertheless, Hamas's attention to the changes which occurred in the Arab world following the Arab Spring, and is adjusting itself accordingly. Hamas had concluded that the next confrontation with Israel will be decided not in the battlefield. By the way, this is the same way of thought that Mahmoud Abbas had. Hamas had concluded that the next confrontation with Israel will be decided not in the battlefield, where Israel is by far superior, but in the diplomatic corridors. That's why Hamas, ever since it was established, in order to understand its change, we should go back to history. Hamas, ever since it was established, it aimed to succeed the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. And now they are understanding that the path to realizing this goal passes through the inside, that is by taking over the PLO from within. By the way, Mahmoud Abbas knows it. Ian Arafat did the same in 1968-69. We should always learn from historical lessons. Hamas demands that the gates of the PLO be opened to him might transform the inter-Palestinian power balance to include not only the redistribution of power and Hamas participation in the PLO decision-making, but also the allocating of financial resources to the movement and its eventual legitimation in both the Arab-Muslim world and the international community. The recent efforts of Hamas leadership
You got to just point it at the laptop.
Okay.
Is that the last slide?
Okay. The recent efforts of Hamas leadership, let's change another
Keep
one,
going, keep going.
to Egypt, where they met the heads of the Muslim brothers, another one, and Turkey, in which they were greeted by Prime Minister, yes, that's the one. Prime Minister Erdogan are a step in this direction. Yet, Hamas' request to open a representative office in Tokyo was declined by the government. But it should be taken into account that Turkey is the only NATO alliance member that recognized Hamas as a legitimate organization since the later formed a government in the Palestinian territories following the democratic election of 2006. The fact that Turkey put a nail in the coffin of Hamas office in Ankara does not necessarily represent a change in its overall policy regarding to the movement. A near visit to Tunis, which you can see over here, if we're talking about some symbolism, symbolized in very nice way the changes in the Middle East following the Arab Spring. Tunis, a near visit to Tunis and the warm welcome received there symbolically demonstrate the historical and cultural changes which has occurred in the Middle East following the Arab Spring. The same city which treated Arafat as a mayor in the 80s and the Fatah activist flocked its restaurants and coffees, now extending a warm welcome to Ismail Haniyeh, head of Hamas government in Gaza. Hamas is currently in the process of searching for political legitimacy. For this reason, Hamas leadership is trying to garner support in the Sunni domain by playing down its relations with Iran, one of its major strategic assets. Against this backdrop, the differences between the Hamas outside, Gaza, in Damascus, in the inside, in Gaza leadership, are made all the more clear. The Hamas leadership within the Gaza Strip, traditionally considered to be more moderate in terms of its ideology, is now, and this leadership now pushing to strengthen the ties with Iran, possibly at the expense of Khaled Mashal in the outside, which now Khaled Mashal has this initiative to consolidate the Sunni camp by tying the knot with the Muslim brothers in Egypt and with Qatar. By the way, Khaled Mashal has a Qatarian passport, and he got some funds, personal funds from the Qataris. This is like the new Qatari project. They're also financing Mohammed Ahlan against Abu Mazen, but that's other story. The Qataris want to see Abu Mazen put down, and they want to have both leadership under their influence, both of Hamas and Fatah. They want to become a major regional player. The driving force behind the win of Iran, from Hamas' point of view, is Ismail Haniyeh, who is seeking to strengthen his position vis-a-vis Hamas outside and secure additional financial channels. Haniyeh ignored the request of the Qatari and the Kuwaiti regimes to cancel his stopover in Iran during his visit to the Gulf states in February 2012. Furthermore, during Haniyeh's visit to Iran, he adopted a hardline approach. He challenged the efforts led by Marshall and instead emphasized the strategic importance of the alliance with Iran. In his speech to crowds gathered to celebrate the 33 anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in Tehran, he voted that Hamas will not abandon the path of jihad and will never come to terms with the existence of Israel. Nowadays, Marshall paradoxically acknowledges Israel's existence, but rejects his right to exist. Hamas has also declared that it does not denounce the path of violence, and when discussing the change the movement is undergoing following the Arab Spring, we can understand them from the word of Khalid Marshall himself. What is needed today is to have resistance in all forms, both armed and public and diplomatic. To a certain extent, Hamas demand to become integrated in the PLO establishment as part of the inter-Palestinian reconciliation process might put sport in its wheel. Ever since PLO signed the Oslo Accords, okay, just 1 minute, I will make it conclude, I will sum up. Yes, I need 2 minutes. As I said, Hamas is now in search of legitimacy, and in order to perceive it, she must sign the reconciliation. She must finish this reconciliation process with Fatah. I would say that the marriage, and I will sum up here, that the marriage between Fatah and Hamas is not match made in heaven. This is made evident by the process set in the motion by the Cairo Accord, which was in actual fact a declaration of principle in anticipation of a future reconciliation. The Doha Declaration that followed under the Qatari auspices that I talked about before under the auspice of the Qatari Crown Prince Sheikh Jassim bin Hamid II, demonstrated the parties' willingness for reconciliation in spite of their different motivations. The Doha Declaration concluded that Abbas will head a temporary government of technocrats which would pave the way for presidential and parliamentary elections to be held in proximity in the reinstitution of the Palestinian National Council of the PLO. I would say that it seems that the Doha Declaration is but another bend in the long winding road towards the intra-Palestinian reconciliation. Fatah and Hamas are searching for a new path in order to revive the parliamentary life in the Palestinian territories. The fact that each has enabled its revival to celebrate its insertion in public rallies held in the 13th of December 2012 for Hamas in the West Bank and the 4th of January 2013 for Fatah in the Gaza Strip shows a will for political normality. Yet, one must remember that significant differences between the parties still remain. Each movement marches to a different tune, and their visions in terms of society and culture do not coincide. It is difficult to predict how the long process of reconciliation will unfold. Yet one fears it might bear a resemblance to the talk between Israel and the Palestinians. It's going to be prolonged, strongly detailed, and strewn with obstacles. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zelkovitz. Now we're going to have Dr. Ferrero present his topic on sidelining the headliners. I'm going to give you a button.
Okay, I have a 2-page paper, so time takes on a different meaning when you're up here, so hopefully I won't talk for too long, but what I have is a draft op-ed rather than an academic piece. First of all, my name is Chris Ferrero. I'm a visiting professor of diplomacy and international relations at Seton Hall. I emphasize the word visiting. If you like what you hear, I will be entertaining job offers when the conference is over. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy that this paper, I have this idea, it coincides nicely with some things I've heard today. My colleague who just spoke about the potential reconciliation between Palestinian factions. Title of my piece is Sidelining the Hardliners, the 2+1 State Solution for Palestine. Now, what I'm about to present to you is potentially controversial. I might have deliberately brought some controversy with me here. One of the reasons I decided to come is this conference was pitched as an opportunity to explore outside the box ideas. You might even think of it as perhaps Machiavellianism for moderates. Two ideas, two premises underlie what I'm about to speak about. First, it is that moderates need to find some kind of clever way to undermine the hardliners in their respective societies, both the Israelis and the Palestinians. The second premise is that this reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas is not particularly serious. It's not a match made in heaven, and it is something that Abu Mazen has found himself involved in due to lack of better options. That would be my reading of the situation. So anyway, it's become conventional wisdom that the peace process is moribund. And over the last couple of years, I've seen quite a few articles starting to revisit the idea or suggest that maybe ultimately there's going to have to be a one-state solution. I don't think that is the case. I think that with a dollop of political will and some fresh thinking, that moderates and pragmatists can still bring about the two-state solution, but via a bridged process. Dr. Ben Meir spoke about narratives this morning. I've done quite a bit of work on narratives, mainly with respect to U.S.-Iran relations. Politicians, especially ideologues, they thrive on narratives. In matters of foreign relations, these are often manifested as simple tales of conflict and woe that justify a particular intransigent position. They rely on historical memory and selective use of facts. They divert blame and they excuse leaders from taking bold action or demanding sacrifices of their citizens. Fortunately, narratives can be diffused by creating new facts and even sometimes by just calling vigorous attention to facts that are already established. So I think that re-emphasizing some basic facts of this conflict and creating some new facts, namely a new framework for Palestinian statehood, could help outmaneuver the hardliners on both sides. So first, the Israeli policy narrative. I'm not talking about the cultural or societal narrative quite the way Dr. Ben Meir spoke this morning, but the policy narrative from Israel is straightforward, and it boils down to the survival and security of the state of Israel and its Jewish inhabitants. According to this narrative, peace cannot be achieved because the Palestinians do not recognize Israel's right to exist and wish to eventually reclaim all of Palestine from the Jews. Okay. This security-focused narrative is disingenuous on two counts. First, it conflates Fatah and the majority of Palestinians with Hamas. Hamas indeed rejects Israel's existence, as has implied that it would treat any agreement as a mere truce pending its eventual pushing of the Jews into the Mediterranean. The PLO and Fatah, however, they've operated on the basis of mutual recognition for some 20 years, and most Palestinians still do support a two-state solution. The second disingenuous aspect of this Israeli policy narrative is that it neglects that there's a powerful minority of Israelis that are themselves guilty of laying claim to much or all of Palestine. Prime Minister Netanyahu demonstrated his sympathy for this movement in a speech to Congress in May 2011 when he said, quote, "In Judea and Samaria, the Jewish people are not foreign occupiers." So the dream of Eretz Israel lives on, and it has gathered some strength and momentum in recent years under Likud leadership. Now, the Palestinian narrative is a little less clearly articulated, but I think it's discernible and has global sympathy and currency. And according to this narrative, I'm going to bring the U.S. in here, the United States is a complicit patron of Israeli aggression and repression. Vacillation by the United States in the face of Israeli settlement expansion and rejection of the Palestinians' efforts to get statehood in the United Nations has added fuel to this discursive fire. Now, this narrative bolsters Hamas and dissuades moderate Palestinians from taking bold steps necessary to achieve a sovereign state. Now, both of these narratives are rooted in some truth. A new approach is needed to diffuse them and redress their attendant truths. And here's my idea of how it could work. All right. Security-based impediment. That's the concern of the Israelis. Hamas in Gaza. That leadership is the chief security-based impediment to a two-state solution. Hamas is a legitimate concern for Israel, but a Palestinian state should not be held hostage to Hamas extremism. Instead, parties, and when I say the parties here, I'm talking about Israel, PA, PLO under Fatah leadership, and I'm writing this from the standpoint of America, and I would like to see the United States exercise some leadership here, should adopt a modified version of the two-state solution as a framework. So 2 states would remain the ultimate goal, but an intermediary 2+1 solution would serve as the bridge. Under a 2+1 solution, a sovereign Palestinian state would be established in the West Bank. Its constitution would prescribe any party or candidate whose charter or platform calls for the destruction of Israel, thus preventing Hamas or any similar party from assuming power or wielding legitimate influence. Meanwhile, Hamas-dominated Gaza would be politically isolated and militarily contained. Its incorporation into the state of Palestine would be contingent upon Hamas's decline or permanent acceptance of Israel. Now, this approach presents pros and cons to both sides. By supporting the 2+1 approach, Israel and the U.S. can diffuse this narrative that they are the chief, unjust, and immovable impediments to Palestinian aspirations. Instead, Hamas could more credibly be framed as the chief impediment to the aspirations of the Palestinian people. This perceptual shift is critical, because the longer Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah come up empty in their efforts to deal with the United States and Israel, the more appealing becomes Hamas's admonition that violent resistance is the only viable long-term solution. Now, this of course assumes that Israeli leaders are serious when they say that they want to have a two-state solution, once their security concerns are addressed. Now, a downside for Israel here is that the 2+1 solution carries the potential to confirm what many believe is Israel's bluff. It's bluffing when it says it wants peace. Now, with its concerns about recognition and security accounted for in a new framework, Israel could no longer lean so heavily on the security narrative to avoid Palestinian statehood. In essence, the Israeli emperor who merely seeks recognition and security could be shown to have no clothes. Now, aside from the possibility of finally getting a state, this is the greatest political incentive for West Bank Palestinians to support the 2+1 approach. Now, of course, asking West Bank Palestinians to make a temporarily separate peace would be a tall order. Some are sure to reject the idea out of hand on the basis of national solidarity. Yet, honestly, by embracing Resolution 242 and recognizing Israel's right to exist, Fatah and the PLO long ago made a separate peace with Israel. Now, tremendous political and technical hurdles remain. What I'm talking about here is a framework comparable to the Declaration of Principles of Oslo. I mean, the final status talks, I don't outline an approach to those. There's no doubt that difficult issues like the status of Jerusalem, right of return, remain. What I'm talking about here is establishing a new framework. And to make this work, there would need to be international buy-in. Israel, the U.S., other actors would have to commit seriously and profoundly to supporting state-building efforts that would foster an entity in the West Bank able to stand in enticing juxtaposition to an extremist enclave in Gaza. Of course, basic humanitarian provisions would have to be guaranteed so the people of Gaza don't unjustly suffer because of extremist leadership. And of course, again, there are details of borders, Jerusalem, and whatnot that need to be worked out. So, in conclusion, the ideological tail wagging the moderate dog is an all too familiar phenomenon in politics, especially in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Ideologues have held peace hostage for too long. Each side must draw out into the open. Each side, should be drawn out, must be drawn out into the open with regard to a unique fundamental question. Is Israel an ideological expansionist power? That's a question for Israel. They must be forced to confront that. Palestinians. Will Palestinians allow a violent and intransigent portion of their own polity to sabotage the reasonable aspirations of an entire nation? The value in finding solutions that challenge or circumvent hardliners and serve the aspirations of the moderate majority of Israelis and Palestinians should be clear. In the context of a peace process that desperately needs new energy, the 2+1 state solution is worth discussing. Let the discussion begin. Thank you.
Thank you. And then our last speaker today will be Dr. Josef Olmert.
Thank you very much for inviting me again. Of course, special thanks to Muhammad, my good friend. We are, good neighbors from Egypt and Israel, so good example of how to make peace. I want also to greet two ladies that sit here. One of them is Andrea Barrow sitting here. She's from, how it's called, Jews for
Israel.
Okay, there's a group like that, 6 members, but they invite them to the meeting. They invite them to their meetings and I can't say no to Andrea, so I always come. And I'm in a minority of 1 against 5. And there's Cecily Hillary from the Voice of America, who doesn't represent the Voice of America right now, but she's interested in the Middle East. So, welcome all. I deal mainly with issues concerning with Syria, but so much is happening, that's why I decided to move to the very boring, uneventful situation in Israel, which is, as you know, very simple, very clear. Talk about Israeli elections and the peace process in the Middle East. So I would like to make the first point, which is to say that it is a somewhat artificial title, because there is no question that in order to achieve real peace in the Middle East, we also need to discuss the Palestinian side, there would be the international community involvement, particularly the US. So talking only about Israel's respect would give us only part of the picture, but I'll deal with Israel, and I will also say a few words about the most recent elections. But I wanted to present a paper which is a little bit more historical, because I believe it could give us some indications as to what we can expect that will happen these days and in the very near future. And the one point I would like to make to start with is, of course, that when one looks at Israeli politics, one can see a very important, crucial dividing line, which is the year of 1977, which put an end to the historic domination of the labor movement in Zionist and then Israeli politics. And since 1977, one can say that for the last 4 decades, Israeli politics have been dominated always, but mostly by the right wing, led by the Likud party and its partners, be them religious or secular parties. And before we go on, I just very briefly want to say that the definitions of left and right when applied to Israel might be misleading a little bit. I have dealt with this issue in another paper, and the reason for that is that if you compare right and left in Israel and in the US, if you put aside the Palestinian issue, you would not believe that the Likud party could be a right-wing party in American terms. After all, Obamacare was invented in Israel 30 years ago by the Likud party, would you believe? One of the most prominent Likud members right now in the Knesset, a guy called Chaim Katz, is the head of one of the biggest unions in Israel. Would you believe a Republican being head of a union? And I mean, they're all not like that. So, you know, we have to be very careful in terms of definitions, which is, by the way, a good point to make about the entire discussion of the Middle East. Words like secular or liberal, when we apply them from our experience towards other countries and cultures, might be misleading. But if one looks at the foundations of the Likud relative domination of Israeli politics in the last 4 decades, one can see the power of some interesting voting blocks that combined together into an electoral coalition, and it didn't change even in the last elections. So one can look at 3 particular groups in that sense. One of them is the religious community in Israel. And when we talk about the religious community in Israel, I would inject another element here, which is the role of religion, but also religiosity in Israeli politics. It's not only those who wear the yarmulke that could be categorized as being religious, it is also all those people who would go to rabbis to consult with, who would go and pray over the graves of tzaddikim or righteous people and then drive on Saturday because why not, there is a football game or whatever. But they are influenced by religious symbols and all that. So if you look at this group of people, as I described it, it may be well over 30% of the Israeli population. There is, you know, a huge group of people. Then you talk about the stronghold of Likud and the right-wing parties, as we call them, over the Sephardi community in Israel, Jews who came from Arab countries and Muslim countries. And clearly, this is a strong group of people. Many of them are religious, so there is, of course, crisscrossing here. But even if one looks at the results of the elections this time one can see the striking, almost dramatic, not almost the dramatic difference between the fact that the right wing, Likud and their satellites still maintain the vast majority among these people as opposed to the ongoing decline among the Jews from Europe, the Ashkenazi Jews in, say, northern Tel Aviv or similar areas in Jerusalem and Haifa and so on. And there is a joke about that when two Jews from Morocco are meeting each other and one says to the other, why do we vote for this guy Menachem Begin? I mean, he's from Poland. So the guy says to him, of course, Poland is a village in Morocco, don't you know? So this is a very strong, formidable group of people. And then, of course, there is the newer element in the coalition, the Jews who came from the former Soviet Union, the Russian Jews, were about 20% of the Jewish population of Israel. And according to polls taken, the vast majority, even in these elections, though a little bit less than usual, voted for this right-wing coalition. And again, the reasons for why the Russian Jews vote for the right wing are interesting, and I'm detailing them in this paper, but I'm not going into all that because I would like to live up to the time frame, so that when you tell me a minute, it will be a minute. Look at Muhammad all the time. He looks, you understand, if he looks like that, I have to finish. Yeah. So the voting patterns of these three groups are not changing so easily, are not going to change so easily. And numerically speaking, they are constituting at least 60, if not more, seats overall in the Knesset. And among the Jewish voters, there are 60 out of 108 or so. It's not that I'm excluding the 12 Arab members of Knesset, none whatsoever. They are integral part of our political system. But it will not be very wise, put it this way, for an Israeli government to depend on crucial issues on the support of these Arab members of Knesset if the majority of the Jewish members of Knesset will be opposed. So there's no question that the Likud-led coalition is still having, even after these elections, a strong majority or a majority among the Jewish electorate in Israel. What is connecting the three elements of this coalition is not religion. For example, the Jews from Russia are much less religious-oriented than the Sephardic Jews. It is not even necessarily an agreement over social issues. What really combines them is that all the three components of the coalition share a sense of Jewish nationalism, even though they come to it from different perspectives. But they all come to the same conclusion, which is when it comes to Eretz Israel, Judea and Samaria, or as you call it, rather the West Bank. By the way, you'll be surprised to hear that in the UN Resolution 181, that talks about the partition, they refer in the text of the decision to Judea and Samaria. This is the historic names of these regions. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to agree to what will be the political conclusion from that. But names are names, we have to bear them in mind. There is a sense that when it comes to the fate of Eretz Israel, one cannot accept a solution based on territorial concessions that will be too significant on the part of Israel, including the removal of Jewish settlements or settlers from those territories. And I'm therefore going back to the history and see three elections in Israel that led to governments and what each one of those governments did with regard to the peace process, which may give us the overall contextual picture. Let's go to 1977, Menachem Begin. Long the end of the pariah of Israeli politics, the warmonger and all that, and he ended up with Anwar Sadat and Jimmy Carter on the South Lawn, whatever it was, of the White House, and then gaining the Nobel Peace Prize. And Menachem Begin was even ready to go to the extreme, from his perspective, of removing all the Jewish settlers and settlements that were at that time around the Gaza Strip and in the Sinai. Two elements here need to be mentioned. One of them is, in his own ideology, Sinai was never taken to be on a comparable level with Judea and Samaria. He made a distinction between Sinai and Judea and Samaria. Judea and Samaria, Eretz Israel, we don't touch it. And what he did, he sacrificed Sinai in order to preserve Judea and Samaria. Because this idea about self-rule for the Palestinians was basically how to maintain these territories which he considered to be historic Israel under some kind of Israeli control, if not full control, but under some kind of Israeli control. And the price of giving up on Sinai seemed attractive to him, particularly that he brought into the fold the largest, strongest Arab country. It was a wise decision on his part, that's my own opinion. But he became prime minister. In 1977, there were 8,000 Jews in Judea and Samaria. When he left his office 6 years later, the number shot up dramatically, and that was the process that developed that under Likud governments, these territories became so significant in terms of the overall functioning and ideology of the Likud governments. So then comes the elections of 1992 and the rise of labor under Yitzhak Rabin, the late Yitzhak Rabin, who was murdered tragically by a criminal that should have been shot. He is now in jail. His name is Ido Zelkovitz. And he established a government with the Meretz party, the left-wing party. And for the first and last time, and I want to emphasize this point, he broke the Likud religious coalition by taking away one of the religious parties from the Likud coalition into his own coalition. This was the Shas party. And that enabled the Oslo Accords. From a political Israeli perspective, internal Israeli perspective, there was a majority for the Oslo Accords only because one of the parties of the traditional Likud religious parties opted to go with Labor. They regretted it to this very day. They still regret it, the Shas party. In 1996, after the murder of Rabin, they of course supported Netanyahu in the elections of 1996, and since then they are firmly in the camp of any opposition to whatever happened since then. And by the way, I would say that contrary to all those people who look at the Oslo Accord with a sense of derision and like, you know, I don't think so. I think the Oslo Accords have been an historic development because they took a conflict that was only one-dimensional based on violence into a conflict which is much more diversified. You have conflict, violence, you have negotiations, talks, and it's a more normal conflict in that sense. But another element that we have to emphasize, Menachem Begin had 45 seats for his own party in 77. Yitzhak Rabin had 44 in 1992. Netanyahu today is only 31. So you need also to have a big party which is the focus of the coalition that could attract smaller parties. The fact of the matter is that Shas would not repeat again what they did in 1992 and became what they were supposed to be all the time, a satellite party of Likud. I would call Shas to be I would define Shas as being the religious wing of Likud. The Shas voters are Likudniks, period. They are Likudniks. They just vote for Rabbi Ovadia Yosef because it's the great Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. There was a great Rabbi Menachem Begin, now we vote for the great Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. 5 minutes, great. Which means 8, 9. Then we come to the third important event that followed the elections and the peace process, which is the Ariel Sharon Ehud Olmert government after 2003 to get engaged with the Gaza disengagement plan, which by the way already created two-state solution. There already are 2 states in Gaza and in Israel. And we talk now about 3-state solution. Well, that's another story. That's another story. Now, Ariel Sharon comes to power in 2001 in the direct election, which was the last one according to the old system, defeating Ehud Barak by 63% to 37. Something that you will never have in America between two, majority that could have been very decisive. But it did not have the same majority in the Knesset. So the parliamentary elections of 2003 gave it the majority. Likud got 38 seats, I believe, almost 40. Rehabilitated a great deal of their losses before. And Sharon decided on a change of direction. That he wants to get rid of Gaza and the control over Gaza for whatever reason. And here are 2 points to be made which will all combine into the overall conclusion that I'm leading to. Gaza has never been considered, even by Likud purists, to be as significant as the rest of the Eretz Israel territories. It was like, somewhere over there, big far away, didn't have the sanctity that was attached and still is to Judea and Samaria. So Sharon could have thought, hey look, my people would agree with it. Now see what happened. He managed to carry the vote in the Knesset in support of this engagement plan with only 21 out of the 38 Likud members of Knesset. 17 out of the 38 voted against him. He managed to get a slim majority for it only with the support of left-wing parties. Not even one religious member of the Knesset voted in favor. What I'm trying to say is, Likud and its religious partners cannot agree ideologically to a solution in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, which will be based on removal of most of the Jewish settlers from where they live and giving away most of those territories. That is to say, there should be another Israeli government, a repetition of, say, what Rabin did in '92. Can it happen that there will be such another government? If we look at the results of the elections that just took place a few weeks ago, I doubt it. I don't believe it. I would love to be proved wrong, just to explain to you where I stand personally. But I don't believe in it. Netanyahu himself said just a few days ago, he needs 3 governments. One for the peace process, one for the economy, one for the attitude towards religious people. And all this question of military service and all that. But even in Israel, with our crazy politics, we can have only one government at a time. So he signed an agreement now with Tzipi Livni. The question is, so what? Who cares? So he has now 37 seats. He needs 61. The immediate reaction from the right wing was, yeah, it's very nice to sign this agreement, but is she going to be in charge of the negotiations? Forget about us. So he can sign an agreement with the other religious parties. It will be, say, 61 members of the Knesset. Government of 61 out of 120 is bound to fall within months or a year or so. Or he can go to a coalition with Yair Lapid and some other parties of the center. Most of his Likud faction will revolt against him and will not cooperate. Out of the 31 members of the Likud bloc that were elected in the 22nd of January, Netanyahu controls 13 out of 31 when it comes to Judea and Samaria. The Lieberman faction and 6 or 7 Likudniks will never vote for anything like the one thing or the thing that Tzipi Livni and others want them to vote for. So, Israeli elections can be very significant. Israeli governments could be very significant. Of course, the Palestinians and others should do whatever they have to do, and I have a lot of stuff to say about that. I will not say it now. I do not believe that the current political configuration in Israel, even with the results that we know now, will make it possible for any Israeli government that will be established after these elections to be able to move ahead with the process if it's based on the assumption that there should be a removal of most of the Jewish settlers from Judea and Samaria and territorial concession over 95+% of this land. This is not going to happen with the current configuration in Israel. And the last point to be made here is Israeli voting patterns reflect a lot of cultural issues that go beyond and above politics. Politics here is in the service of culture, not the other way around. You can debate why Jews from Arab countries are so hawkish. There are reasons for that. You can debate why Jews from former Soviet Union are so hawkish. There are reasons for that. That go beyond politics. And you can debate why the religious community in Israel has changed course, because until 77 they were the most loyal partners of the labor movement, and after 77 they changed. The change started after 67 but came into full being after 77. These are all issues that have a lot to do with politics, but much more so with cultural issues of identity. And as much as I can see political changes by way of one seat here or another seat there or 2 seats here or 2 seats there, in order to have an Israeli government which needs to make a decision based on major Israeli concessions, you need more than 61. This is the lesson of Oslo. And that, as far as I can see, is not going to happen in the foreseeable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our speakers. We're going to open it up for questions.
Thank you. I just had a very brief comment for Dr. Zelkovitz and a question for all of you. I wouldn't dispute the idea that the PA and Fatah, after Oslo, after they were created, the PA was created, that they were repressive towards Palestinian society, just that the Israelis also were not helpful either before. Because it sounded like you were saying that there was a vibrant Palestinian society that the Palestinian leadership crushed, but I think there was also crushing before Oslo. And just in general, as far as the peace process, assuming that the Israeli government's aim isn't to undermine Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, why don't they do more to support them as a counterweight to Hamas? And do you see any scenario where U.S. pressure could give Netanyahu and the government and Knesset enough diplomatic cover to make some sort of bold move?
Okay. On the civil society issue, before the Oslo Accord, the Palestinian National Movement, Munazama Tahrir al-Palestiniya, the PLO, and Hamas used the civil society in order to operate. So of course Israel tried to crush the civil society inside the occupied territories. Outside, in the diaspora, the civil society was very vibrant. The PLO encouraged a very flourished discourse in order to create a democratic sphere among his members. It was a pseudo-democratic sphere, but they let everyone to share, to express itself. In the end, Arafat take the decision, yeah? Now I don't think that American pressure can change Netanyahu. Netanyahu, as I see the situation, want to preserve the status quo. If he will go too much far away, that's my assumption, his coalition will break out. The coalition will collapse, as Dr. Olmert described it very well. So, thank you.
I would like to make a quick point about the question of American pressure, but from another perspective. And that's again something that I wrote about just recently in another. I don't believe in all this American pressure mythology and concept and all that. And for two reasons. One is, if the two parties would not like to do something that they need to do from their own perspective, American pressure is not helpful. You look at Clinton putting them together at Camp David for weeks, nothing happened. You look at Carter putting them together after Sadat was in Jerusalem, it worked because Sadat and Begin wanted to make peace for this or that set of reasons. Now the other point about this American pressure stuff is that, look, there was American pressure on Netanyahu after the elections of 2009 to freeze the construction of new settlements. And the quid pro quo was supposed to be what? You freeze the construction of new settlements as if this was the real problem between Israelis and Palestinians, forgetting that Abbas and Ido Zelkovitz, somebody whom I've known for many years, not so bad, by the way. They met, Abbas and Olmert met 11 times, and Abbas never said free settlements. Wasn't the condition. Came Mr. Obama, and they decided this was a condition, and Netanyahu complied, and nothing happened. So America exhausted its ability to pressure because it picked up the wrong approach. And one can argue that maybe if they would have done something else, it would have led to another result. There was another pressure. Netanyahu made all kinds of mistakes. Prior to the American presidential election, with all this business with Iran, all of a sudden that was supposed to, I don't know what he was supposed to do, but also the Americans had their share of leaks designed to indicate to Israeli people that we don't like Netanyahu so much and so on. It didn't matter. In the end of the day, it has to be based on what these people on the ground see as their main, vital, significant, existential issue, interest. And they should do it. And then the Americans can come with a package of political and economic incentives and finalize it, giving the finishing touches to this. But it can't be American pressure if Abbas or Netanyahu, or Abbas and Olmert could not come to their own agreements, nothing will help. Not even American pressure. So let's get away a little bit from all those mythologies. You know, we need to be much more realistic about it.
Maybe this is that.
I am Uizaki. My question is to Dr. Olmert, and you just mentioned another Olmert,
Yeah.
which you said you know very well, and I have a good reason to believe you do.
We share the same support for the same football team in Jerusalem. That's what
So I've
left.
heard, but it's hard to support these days with
Yeah,
the way they're.
don't even mention it to me. I mean,
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm depressed already.
I must say, full disclosure, I was on the merits list in the last election, so that's where I come from. The merits list, as Dr. Olmert said, is a progressive Israeli party. But I must say that I do not share your analysis in two elements. One, and that would, oh, you know what? I'll mention one element and then I'll put a question. The first element is that Likud leaders cannot lead to a two-state solution. I think Netanyahu cannot lead to a two-state. Well, doesn't want to. He could. He could have gotten a huge majority if he would have led to something like that. I think Netanyahu is ideologically against that, while other leaders, I don't know what would have happened. Begin did, in a way, Begin was the one who started Oslo because the Oslo agreement, the 5-year agreement, was based on Camp David, the Palestinian autonomy, and I don't know what would have happened if Dayan and Weizmann, for instance, would have not left the government back then. Sharon, his people tell me that.
He left Likud. I mean, that's my point. He left Likud.
Fine, but he would have. He and then this Olmert, you know.
He also left Likud.
Right.
I left Likud as well, so what?
But they won an election. They won an election. What I'm saying is that either a leader of Likud can make a change, but you can also, or that's my question.
Yeah.
I know that this Olmert, for instance, is thinking, many in Israel hope that he will do it, of forming a government, and right now he's his own deadline. He is a two-state solution. So if he accepts your analysis, he doesn't have anything to.
Well, if he establishes a new government, will be the prime minister, will you even talk to me? I mean, you know, look, I mean, okay, Uri, right? Look, the point I made was about Likud. I grew up in Likud. I'm a classic Likudnik. So why did you leave? Okay, I'm a classic Likudnik. And all I know is that from day one of our lives, and I'm 62 years old, we knew that Eretz Israel belongs to the Jewish people. That's our raison d'etre. And the current configuration in the Knesset means there is no majority for what you talk about. There is none. Because 18 out of the 31 members of the Likud bloc are opposed to it, and add up together to this the religious parties and all the rest of them, it's more or less 60-60. There is not going to be a Knesset vote along those lines. So the lesson is exactly what I said, and if I didn't emphasize it enough, so it's a good comment, I will make it in my final written version. Rabin was not Likud, and then Sharon left Likud. A Likud-led coalition will not bring about Israeli concessions in Judea and Samaria. This is against the DNA. And by the way, there's a new joke now in Likud after all this Netanyahu's whatever. So somebody said, you know, in the end of the day, even Likud will be the new coalition.
Yeah.
Even they will be the new coalition. I mean, this is Moshe Feiglin, that 6 or other 7 Likud members that would say to Netanyahu, you can make whatever agreement you want, we're going to vote against you. And they will vote against him. And the liberal people will vote against him. So all I reflected was that, but only you know and I know, that if your party is composed of very nice people, you're one of them, will not be able to get into Sderot, into Afula, into South Tel Aviv, into North Jerusalem, into the areas of Haifa and all the rest of them, you will never be able to come back to power in Israel. And I checked the Israeli elections this time, pound by pound. Nothing has changed. Likud lost 7 seats to Bennett, to the right, and 3 seats to Lapid of Russian voters, and this is it. No real transfer of vote from left to right or right to left. And that means that the right wing continues to dominate altogether because 3 right-wing parties failed to achieve the threshold, and they got in between the 3 of them 200,000 votes, which would have given them 4 more seats in the Knesset. Otzma Israel, Rabbi Amsalem, and Rabbi, the other crazy guy, Rabbi Amen Yitzhak. And not even one left-wing party was out of the Knesset. So overall, the trend is very clear here, and it didn't change. So it's not about the debate here.
There was no central.
All right, so if you believe that my brother is the Messiah, I will go along with you. But what can I tell you? I mean, you know, it's against Jewish ideology to believe that somebody not from the house of David, King David, could be the Messiah, but the Olmert family are good people. That's right.
So my question is kind of an implication of your analysis of the elections. And I'm wondering if the Israeli government sees Hamas as a convenient enemy that can justify their avoidance of a two-state solution or reconciliation, and would explain their lack of an effort to wipe out Hamas.
Right now, there is an Israeli delegation in Cairo negotiating with Hamas. Are you aware of it? So now you know. Here is. Look, the problem with Hamas is a Hamas problem, not Israel. All they need to do is to say, we recognize Israel and they are partners, period. They are no less good, in that case, than Abbas is. And by the way, don't call him Abu Mazen, not you. Mr. Abbas is a distinguished, dignified person, he has a name. Look, they didn't do in Gaza what you might have implied there for one simple reason. No government in Israel will ever give the order to the IDF to kill 10,000 people in Gaza, period. The Israeli military could have crushed Hamas within 2 hours. 2 squadrons of F-16s over Gaza, like Bashar Assad does to his people, and there is no Hamas in Gaza, God forbid. Nobody in Israel will give these orders to any IDF command ever in the history of Israel, period. And this is the weakness of the Israeli position about Gaza. And this is the strength of Hamas. They are sacrificing 1,000 people of their people in order not to add 10,000 more killed so that they can claim whatever victory. What is the problem militarily? You put 2 batteries of artillery around Gaza and 2 squadrons of F-16s. Where is Hamas there? What did they do in Gaza? Even according to Hamas propaganda, they hardly killed civilian people this time, only combatants with precision bombing and all that. That's not the way to conduct a war, really. They were forced into it. Netanyahu didn't want to go to this war. I mean, I'm not a Netanyahu supporter, you can hear it, but he was forced into this war because he knew what the result would be. And people said to him, Ehud Olmert, that Uri Zaki wants to be the next prime minister. He went into Gaza, and you don't go into Gaza? And Netanyahu, to be fair about that, said, no, I'm not going into Gaza, because he knew what the price would be. 5,000, 10,000 people killed in Gaza. How can Israel look itself in the mirror? That's the weakness of a democracy. That's the truth. Why we don't do to Hamas in Gaza what they deserve to be, you can't do that. That's the naked, blatant truth.
My speculation, though, is that Hamas is asset to hardliners in Israel because...
Maybe, you know, but okay, look, but they exist. So what can you do?
If I can add,
What?
if I can
Sorry, what are you saying?
operated,
Israel fund Hamas?
Israel fund Hamas?
Allowed money to be
Oh, you mean in the way in the beginning?
Yeah.
No, I mean, no, she meant historically when they started Hamas in order to counter
if I can,
You know what? I will take a 30 seconds from your time. Look, it is another way of how to look at the Middle East. Did Israel help Hamas or not? We can debate it, but I'll tell you this: why do you think that in every Muslim society in the world can be a fundamentalist group like Hamas is, but not among the Palestinians? you really look down at the Palestinians if you think that they needed Israel to establish Hamas for them. And this is a patronizing attitude, not personal between the two of us, okay, don't look at it like this. This is a patronizing attitude of people outside of the Middle East that they believe that the Arabs don't know what is good for them. There is Hamas in Gaza exactly as there is Hamas anywhere else in the Islamic world. And people like Hamas, I mean. Why would it be different? And Abdallah Azzam, who was the mentor, these are facts, look. Abdallah Azzam, who was the mentor of, what's his name, of Osama bin Laden, came from Jenin and left Jenin before the establishment of Hamas. Did you know that? What does it have to do with Israel? I mean, let's be realistic here. It has to do with the Islamic trend in Islamic societies that is also existing among Palestinians because they're as good Muslims and Arabs as any other one is. Why would it be different?
And Abdallah Azzam was a member of Fatah before he left.
By the way, he's a member of Fatah from Jenin. He was the mentor of Osama bin Laden, and he left much before the establishment of Hamas. Nothing to do with it. Okay, this is a fact.
If I can add a remark, well, Israel talked with Hamas before Hamas was established, and later on, Mahmoud Azzar, for example, was visiting the Kiryat, the Israeli air base, when Yitzhak Rabin wanted to know what is Hamas in the end of the 80s. That's the facts. Paradoxically, I think the resolutions of the last operation in Gaza, pillar of defense, make Hamas more stronger than before. I mean, Hamas now became more legitimate, and it wants, like I presented, to be a political player. Now, Hamas got a guaranteed agreement supervised by the Egyptians and the Americans. And they're talking with Israel, well, according to the press, through negotiations. But I tell you a secret, if Israel wants to talk with Hamas, they can do it directly. That's the facts. When Israeli representative sits in Cairo, in the same hotel with the Hamas,
by coincidence.
Yes, I think they don't need the Egyptians to mediate between them.
I think we have one last question, and then we're going to wrap up the session.
So what should President Obama say to Abu Mazen when he comes to Ramallah to advance the peace talks?
Ask him. First of all, he's a welcome guest in Israel. He's pro-Israel. I don't like all those people who say that he's an enemy of Israel. I risked my neck. I wrote a piece in my weekly blog in the African Post defending his 1967 speech. I found 6 points in the speech. I said 4 were pro-Israel, 2 only were against, 4 to Israel. They have to be very respectful of him, and Netanyahu made terrible mistakes in dealing with him. Obama did make terrible mistakes in dealing with Netanyahu as well, having him waiting in the corridor when he had dinner with his family. We know all the stories. He needs to say to the Israelis and to the Palestinians, once you decide to make peace and you sit down together, when you are about to finish it, I'll come and do with you what Jimmy Carter, what others did. That's what he has to tell them.
Is this premature?
Yeah.
What do you think about this?
I think one of the things that you should say to them is, I'm going to take advantage of my lame duck status now that I don't have to worry about getting reelected, and I'm going to pressure Congress to use its leverage. I know that'll never happen.
Why would you say that?
So why would you say that? And likewise, perhaps point out the inconsistency, what seems to be an inconsistency in the Likud position, that if only Hamas would recognize Israel, then they would be an equal partner and you negotiate, but at the same time, there's absolutely no way that 1 inch of Eretz Israel will be surrendered. So what is the end goal then? We get Hamas into a situation of perpetual ongoing negotiations that lead to nothing. I don't think Likud can have its cake and eat it too, and I think Obama needs to point that out to everyone. That's what a leader does, and we have a dearth of leadership in the United States on this issue.
But the point is that Hamas cannot recognize the existence of Israel on the philosophical level.
Well, I mean, there's always one part to it, and I'm not defending Hamas, but I'm really against the media presenting false information. What Hamas said initially, before it even became more militant, when they asked about recognition of Israel, they said, which one? 1956 or 1976 or, what? I mean, that's really very much buried in the language that Hamas does not recognize the state of Israel. And the question is to Hamas, tell us which Israel, we can and we cannot recognize, based on the different vote that has shifted, as Israel won more territory. That's really one of the issues. But if you listen to, our right-wing media, they present misinformation, unfortunately, that the American public take for granted and see they will never recognize Israel. But that's not really the true story, as we know.
They're the same level, huh?
Yeah.
We're sitting tomorrow, we recognize Israel as its right to exist on
Yeah.
our borders.
That's a political game, but very interesting voice, that is not heard in the media is the voice of the Palestinian left. And when we talk about calls to end the Palestinian divide, the Palestinian left was demonstrating against Abbas on the one hand and Hamas on the other hand. And they say, well, there is no differences. This is what say PFLP and another leftist faction. There is no true differences between Fatah and Hamas. Both of them, in the end of the day, this is the Palestinian left, recognize Israel in this form or another. The main issue, they say, is that we are the Palestinian forgetting our history and our heritage. They say, in our newspaper, there are no information about what's happening in Lod, in Shfaram, in Jaffa, etc. And they say, our main mission right now is to change the Palestinian mind, and we are the one that calls not forgive, not forget it to the Palestinian Authority for giving up on the Palestinian dream of the whole Palestine and the right of return.
We're all set. Thank you so much for attending. We welcome you back next year at the Dialogue.